Hi and Assalamualaikum. We are from Group C. We'll do a presentation for the question A. Describe the concept of item difficulty, item discrimination, and distractor analysis. Give example to support your description. And B. Differential the formative assessment and summative assessment. I will introduce you to our group members. Firstly is Amira Natasha binti Muhammad Nasir with the matric number 162834. Secondly is Nur Zahira Akila binti Muhammad Pauzi 161740. Next, Nurhani Zura Aisha binti Azman 162856, and me myself Siti Nur Safwa binti Zulkifli 161636, and lastly Arisha Ilyana binti Wahi 161538. So we will continue to our first question in the next slide.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and hi. First of all, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Amira Natasha binti Muhammad Nasir. Let's start our discussion with one question, which is describe the concept of item difficulty, item discrimination, and distractor analysis, and give example to support your description. So, let's start with introduction. Introduction of item analysis. Item analysis is process which examines student response to individual test item in order to assess the quality of those items and of the test as a whole. Item analysis also helps teacher examines assessment and figure out if they are good measure for testing their students. I will give one example. If the test is too hard or too easy for a group or for some group of students, then administering an assessment is a waste of time and does not aid us in the measure of student learning. And components of test item analysis is item difficulty, item discrimination, and item distractor. Based on item analysis that I have mentioned before, I will explain about item difficulty first. Concept of item difficulty is item trait given by the amount of students who are capable of answering the item correctly and relate to the complexity of the question. Item difficulty use the percentage of students who got a particular question correct as a measurement of question difficulty. In other way, I will say that item difficulty is simply the percentage of students who answer an item correctly. And based on formula that I have given on the slide, in the slide, that say if 85% of students got the question correct, then it will consider as a low difficult item. And if only 28 of students got the question correct, it will consider as a high difficult item. The item difficulty index range is from 0 to 100, and the higher value of index, so that's mean the more easier question is. I will continue to the next slide. In this slide, I will explain more about percentage of students who answer the item correctly. If you can see, if 30% and below of students who can answer the question, it means the question is difficult. And if 80% and above of students who can answer the question, it means the question is easy. So let's go to the second point, which is item difficulty level. Let's assume that number of students who answer each item is 15. And now, look at item number 1. In item number 1, number of students who can answer the question correct is only 15, equal to 30%. So, we will consider that the question is high. So, now, look at item number 4. In item number 4, 45 students can answer the question correctly. So, equal to 90%. So, we will assume that difficulty level of the question is low. Now, I will give some example for the item difficulty. Based on concept item difficulty, now look at example number 1. Imagine this is an exam question for a primary school student. Question number 1 is identify the synonym of the words abundant. The correct answer is plentiful. Based on this question, 30% of the student in the exam can answer the question correctly. The item difficulty for this question would be 30%. It's shown that the question is quite challenging for the majority of students in that exam group because only certain person or only certain student can answer this question. Now, look at example number 2. Example number 2 is identify the antonym for the words kind. 90% of the student answer this question correctly. The item difficulty would be 90%. So, it will consider that the question is relatively easy for the majority of primary students. Based on the example, I will conclude that item difficulty helps educator for assess how difficult or easy a question is for a specific group or exams and make appropriate adjustment in the development or assessment process. So now I will pass this discussion or presentation to the next person. Thank you.
Assalamualaikum. My name is Nurhanizura Aisyah binti Azman. Now I will continue the presentation. Firstly, the concepts of item discrimination. Item discrimination refers to the ability of an item to differentiate among students on the basis of how well they know the material being tested. Various hand calculation procedures have traditionally been used to compare item response to total test scores using high and low scoring group of students. It is the extent to which items discriminate among trainees in the highs and low groups. The total tests and each item should measure the same things. High performers should be more likely to answer a good item correctly, and low performers more likely to answer incorrectly. Next is the formula. This discrimination index is T, the degree to which an item differentiates correctly among test takers in the criterions that the test is designed to measure. To compute item discrimination, a test is scored, scores are ranked, ordered, and 27% of the highest and lowest scorers are selected. Pu is proportion of upper group who answer correctly, and PL is proportion of lower group who answer correctly. Next, this is an example. Table A is the students' math scores. As there are 12 students in the class, 33% of this total will be for students. Therefore, the upper group and lower group will each consist of 4 students each. Based on their total scores, the upper group will consist of students L, A, E, and G, while the lower group will consist of students J, H, D, and I. Now we need to look at the performance of the students for each item in order to find the item discrimination index of each item. Let's see the next slide. For item 1, all 4 students in the upper group, L, A, E, and G, answer correctly, while only student H in the lower group answer correctly. Using the formula described earlier, we can plug in the number as follows. 2 points should be noted. First, item discrimination is especially important in norm reference testing and interpretation, as in such instance where there is a need to discriminate between good students who do well and weaker students who perform poorly. In criterion reference test, item discrimination does not have as important a role. Secondly, the use of 33.3% of the total number of students who attempt the item in the formula is not flexible as it is possible to use any percentage between 27.5% to 35% as the value. That's all from me. Thank you.
So next, we proceed to distractor analysis. So what is distractor analysis? Distractor analysis is a method of evaluating the quality and effectiveness of multiple choice questions and also quizzes. It involves examining how students respond to each option and identifying which ones are misleading, irrelevant, or too easy. So by doing this, teacher can improve assessment design, provide better feedback, and enhance students' learning outcomes and also satisfaction. A distractor is considered to be a good distractor when it attracts more examinees from the group of low achievers than the group of high achievers. So next, we also can see three weaknesses of an item based on distractor analysis. So first one is miskey. It can be seen when no one choose the answer of option B. So it means that the answer is misleading or miskey. Next is students guess the answer of item and also question. It can be seen when the students choose the option of answer similarly. And last is distractors not functioning well. It occurs when no one students choose the answer of B or B and D. So the distractor is not function and should be replaced. Okay, last but not least, I want to show you all an example of distractor analysis based on upper group and lower group. So based on table B, A is the answer. First, the value for distractor B is 0. So it tells us that distractor did not discriminate between the students of upper and also lower group. So it means that the distractor for option B is questionable. Besides, for distractor C, most students in lower group selected this distractor. So it means that this distractor is function because many students in lower group choose that distractor. Why? Because a negative value is more preferred than positive value when we use concept of upper group and lower group. So it means that the distractor is function. How can we know whether it is a good distractor or is a bad distractor? So the effectiveness of this distractor is based on calculate of item difficulty and also item discrimination. So I think that's all from me. I pass to the next presenter. Thank you.
So I will move forward to the question B, which is differential to formative assessment and summative assessment. Assessment is the measurement of progress toward achieving learning outcomes and how that progress is evidenced and communicated to the learner and achieving team. There are three main types of assessment that help evidence learners' knowledge, skills, and experience, which is diagnostic assessment, formative assessment, and summative assessment. There are a few criteria to designing an assessment, which is first, ensuring that all assessments support learning outcomes. Next, planning the optimal number of assessments to support student learning and evaluation without overwhelming learners. Third, ensuring learners receive equitable and standardized marking and feedback. Next, I will explain detail about the differential between formative and summative assessment from a few aspects. First, from aspect of definition. Formative assessment is to monitor student learning and provide ongoing feedback to staff and students. The feedback can be used by instructors to improve their teaching and by students to improve their learning. The assessment is being carried throughout the instructional process. While summative assessment is to evaluate student learning by comparing it against some standard or benchmark. Summative assessment are given at the conclusion of an instructional period. It means that the evaluation takes place not during the process but after it. Next, from the aspect of types. Formative assessment is being given throughout worksheets, classroom discussions, homeworks, and class presentations, while summative assessment is being measured by midterms, final project, evaluations, and final exams. And last, from the aspect of grading, a formative assessment can be retaken or redone after further learning has occurred and can track student progress. Sometimes a formative assessment will not even be graded because it just used to help the teacher adjust future lessons. Meanwhile, summative assessment is not allowed to be retaken. Any growth may be shown on the next summative assessment, but once a test has been taken, the grade cannot change. This assessment is always graded because it assesses achievements.
So next, I will give the difference between formative assessment and summative assessment in the aspect of timing. For formative assessment, the timing usually conducted during the learning process, often throughout a course or unit, while for summative assessment, it is conducted at the end of the instructional period to summarize the learning outcomes. For example, for the timing of formative assessment, teacher usually use two-way communication in the learning process, such as using class presentations and homework right after class to the students. While for summative assessment, for the timing, teacher usually make a test for students at the end of the school teaching syllabus to identify the student understanding of the subject. Secondly, we can see the difference in the aspect of frequency. For formative assessment, are typically ongoing and frequently. It is allowing for adjustment and improvement to teaching and learning activities. For example, we can see that teacher usually use formative assessment every time at the end of the class session, like giving quizzes, giving exercises and homework to the students to identify their weakness. While for summative assessment are typically conducted less frequently, often at the end of a semester, school year, or specific unit of study. This means after teacher finish teaching the whole topic, they will make a test to the student to identify their understandable and their weakness. Lastly, the difference we can see in the aspect of focus. For formative assessment, the focus is on understanding and addressing students' strengths and weaknesses in real time to enhance their learning experience. For example, teacher can immediately change their teaching method based on the student's understandable and weakness. While for summative assessment, the focus on assigning grades or determining a student's overall level of mastery in a subject of course. This means the grades will determine the student's understandable of the subject. Thank you.
So last, these are our sources that we use to complete this assessment. I think that's all from us. Thank you.